August in Southern California. It's a time of oppressive heat, of sun-bleached landscapes, and the Santa Ana winds whispering secrets through the canyons. For most 19-year-olds, it's the last gasp of summer freedom before the structure of college life reclaims them. It's a season of promise, of beginnings. But in August of 2013, for a young man named Bryce Laspisa, it was a season of endings. His story isn't a simple one, not a clean narrative with a clear beginning, middle, and end. It's a tangled, haunting echo that begins on a long, dark road and ends in a deafening silence. To understand the mystery of what happened to Bryce, you first have to understand who he was. He was, by all accounts, a work of art in progress. Raised in the manicured suburbs of Laguna Niguel, a planned community in the heart of Orange County, Bryce was the cherished only child of Karen and Michael Laspisa. He was a handsome kid, with a shock of reddish blonde hair, bright, intelligent eyes, and a smile that could disarm you from across a room. His parents had poured everything into him, not just resources, but love, attention, and opportunity. He was a talented artist, his creativity spilling onto canvases, his designs winning awards in high school. He had an eye for aesthetics, an appreciation for the visual world that translated into a passion for industrial design. That passion had led him to Sierra College, nestled in the Northern California town of Rocklin, a 7-hour drive from the familiar comfort of his family home. The summer of 2013 had been a good one. Bryce was home, back in the cradle of his family's affection. The days were filled with the easy rhythm of suburban life. Mornings might be spent at the beach, the salty air and the rhythmic crash of Pacific waves of familiar comfort. He worked part-time, earning money for the upcoming school year. But the job was secondary to the life he was living. He was surrounded by friends he'd known for years, the kind of deep-rooted connections that define a young life. There were bonfires on the beach, the smell of burning wood mixing with the sea spray. There were late-night drives along the Pacific Coast Highway, the car windows down, music blasting, the world feeling infinite. He was close with his parents, a relationship that had navigated the often turbulent teenage years and emerged into a kind of mutual respect and friendship. Karen and Michael weren't just parents, they were his biggest cheerleaders, his confidants. They were proud of the young man he was becoming, creative, popular, and with a seemingly bright future stretching out before him. As August began to wane, the new semester at Sierra College loomed. There was an energy around Bryce, an excitement to get back to his studies, to immerse himself once more in the world of design, to reconnect with his college friends and his girlfriend, Kim. The drive from Laguna Niguel to Rocklin is a long one, a straight shot up the spine of California on Interstate 5. It's a monotonous journey, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the vast agricultural heartland of the state. But for Bryce, that drive north represented a passage back to his own life, to the independence and identity he was forging for himself. He had packed his 2004 Toyota Highlander with his belongings, his art supplies, his clothes, his hopes for the semester. He had hugged his parents goodbye, promising to call, promising to visit. It was a scene that plays out in millions of homes every year, the bittersweet ritual of a child leaving the nest. There was nothing to suggest it was anything other than ordinary, nothing to hint at the storm that was gathering just over the horizon. He was just a 19-year-old kid, driving toward his future. But somewhere on that road, somewhere between the life he knew and the one he was building, Bryce Laspisa took a detour, a turn into a deepening twilight from which he would never return. The first sign that something was wrong was subtle, a discordant note in the symphony of a normal life. Bryce had been back at Sierra College for just 2 weeks, but the vibrant, enthusiastic young man who had left Laguna Niguel seemed to be fading, replaced by a more erratic and troubled version. His friends were the first to notice. Bryce, usually social and engaging, started to become more withdrawn. He was drinking more heavily than usual, not just the typical college partying, but a more deliberate, more intense consumption. He was taking Vyvanse, an amphetamine-based prescription drug used to treat ADHD. While he had a prescription, his friends reported he was using it excessively. The drug, a powerful stimulant, seemed to be fueling a change in his personality. He was more agitated, more prone to sudden shifts in mood. He wasn't sleeping. His girlfriend, Kim, bore the brunt of this transformation. Their conversations, once easy and affectionate, became strained. He would call her and seem out of sorts, his words not quite lining up, his thoughts scattered. Then, on the night of August 27th, he did something completely out of character. He ended their relationship. The breakup was abrupt, delivered over the phone, and it left Kim bewildered and concerned. He told her he needed to sort some things out, that he had a lot on his mind. He told her she would be better off without him. It sounded final, rehearsed. Later that night, his roommate, Sean, saw him. Bryce was sitting in his room, drinking a bottle of hard liquor. He was giving away some of his prized possessions. He handed a friend a pair of diamond earrings his mother had given him. He gave his Xbox to another. It was as if he was divesting himself of his own life, piece by piece. He told Sean he was going to drive home to Laguna Niguel. It was late, and Sean tried to talk him out of it, urging him to sleep it off, to wait until morning. But Bryce was insistent. He had to go. He had something important he needed to tell his parents. He packed a small bag, grabbed his keys, and walked out into the cool Northern California night. He left behind a room full of his belongings, an apartment full of concerned friends, and a life that was rapidly unraveling. The long drive south had begun, a 7-hour drive. That's all it is from Rockland to Laguna Niguel. Under normal circumstances, Bryce should have been pulling into his parents' driveway before the sun came up on Wednesday, August 28th. But this was not a normal drive. It was the beginning of a bewildering 20-hour odyssey that would trace a path of confusion and growing dread across the California landscape. The first call to his parents, Karen and Michael, came in the early hours of the morning. It was Bryce, his voice on the other end of the line. But something was off. He wasn't making sense. He told them he was on the road, heading south, but his location seemed to change with each call. He was pulling off the highway, then back on. He was heading in one direction, then another. Karen and Michael were frantic. Their son was out there, on the dark, lonely expanse of Interstate 5, and he was clearly in distress. They tried to keep him on the phone, to guide him home, their voices a desperate lifeline stretching across the miles. Throughout the day on Wednesday, the strange, disjointed calls continued. He told his mother he was in Buttonwillow, a small, dusty town in the middle of the Central Valley, known mostly for its truck stops and the barren landscape that surrounds it. He said he was just sitting in his car, parked off the side of the road. Why wasn't he driving? He couldn't explain it. He just was. Karen, her maternal instinct screaming that something was terribly wrong, pleaded with him. Let her come get him. Let them send help. But Bryce refused. No, Mom, don't, he insisted. I have something to tell you, but I have to tell you when I see you. The hours ticked by. Mid-morning, Bryce called his mother to say his car had run out of gas. A roadside assistance service was dispatched. The driver, a man named Christian, found Bryce and his Toyota Highlander on a quiet stretch of road. He brought him a few gallons of gas, enough to get him to the next town. Christian would later recall that Bryce seemed like a normal kid. He was polite, lucid. There was nothing in his demeanor to suggest the turmoil that was clearly raging within him. But after Christian left, Bryce didn't drive to a gas station. He stayed put. More calls to his parents, more confusion. They could hear the sound of the road in the background, the whoosh of passing trucks, but he wasn't making progress. He was just stuck, not just physically, but mentally. The sun beat down on the Central Valley, the heat rising in waves from the asphalt, and Bryce Laspisa sat in his car, lost in a wilderness of his own making. While his parents waited by the phone, their hope dwindling with every passing hour. The afternoon of Wednesday, August 28th, brought a new wave of anxiety for Karen and Michael Laspisa. They had been on the phone with Bryce for hours, a maddening, circular conversation that went nowhere. He was still in Buttonwillow, still parked, still refusing their help. They felt helpless hundreds of miles away, their only connection to their son a voice that sounded increasingly distant and disconnected. Finally, they convinced him to let them call roadside assistance again. This time, a tow truck was sent. The driver found Bryce in the same general area where he had run out of gas earlier. The Toyota was pulled onto the flatbed, and Bryce climbed into the cab of the tow truck. He was quiet during the ride to the small town of Buttonwillow. The tow truck driver later reported that Bryce's demeanor was odd. He was coherent, able to answer questions, but there was a blankness to his eyes, a lack of effect that was unsettling. He seemed to be observing the world around him rather than participating in it. He didn't seem panicked or scared, just pubsent. The tow truck dropped Bryce and his Highlander at a service station in town. His parents, still on the phone, could hear the transaction as he paid the driver. They begged him to stay there, to let them make the drive north to come and get him. Again, he refused. He insisted he was fine, that he would start driving south again. He promised, but he didn't. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the dusty streets of Buttonwillow. Bryce remained. He sat in his car in the parking lot of the service station for hours. He was seen by locals, a solitary figure in a parked car, the glow of his phone illuminating his face. What was he doing? Was he reading messages, looking at maps, or just staring into the digital abyss, lost in a world no one else could see? Late that evening, a Kern County Sheriff's deputy, on a routine patrol, noticed the parked vehicle. The deputy approached the car and found Bryce. They ran his license and registration. Everything was in order. They spoke to him, asked if he was okay. Bryce was calm, respectful. He said he was just tired, taking a break from a long drive. He told the deputy he was on his way to see his parents in Laguna Niguel. There were no signs of intoxication, no drugs in plain sight. From the deputy's perspective, there was no reason to hold him, no cause to intervene. He was a 19-year-old kid in his own car, breaking no laws. The deputy told him to be safe and drove away, leaving Bryce alone once more in the encroaching darkness. The night wore on, thick and starless over the Central Valley. For Karen and Michael, the hours between the deputy's visit and the next phone call were an eternity of silence, a vacuum filled with their worst fears. Had he started driving? Had he fallen asleep? Had something happened? Finally, the phone rang. It was Bryce. He was back on the road. The relief they felt was immense, but short-lived. His speech was still disjointed, his route still a mystery. He was heading south on I-5, that much was clear, but his progress was agonizingly slow. A drive that should have taken a few more hours was stretching into an all-night ordeal. He would be on the phone with them, the conversation flowing, and then he would suddenly go quiet. They would call his name, their voices tight with panic, and after a few heart-stopping seconds, he would respond, as if waking from a dream. "I'm here," he'd say, his voice flat. "I'm still driving." At one point, he told them he was pulling off the highway near a town called Castaic. This was a significant landmark. Castaic is at the northern edge of Los Angeles County, the gateway to the sprawling metropolis of Southern California. It meant he was getting closer. He was finally emerging from the desolate loneliness of the Central Valley. From Castaic, he was only about an hour and a half from home. Hope began to rekindle in their weary minds. Maybe he was finally going to make it. Maybe this long nightmare was nearing its end. But the final leg of the journey proved to be the most baffling of all. He didn't stay on the main artery of I-5. Instead, he took a series of strange detours, winding his way through the dark, semi-rural roads that snake through the canyons and foothills around Castaic Lake. He told his parents he was tired and was going to pull over to sleep for a bit. The last call came at 2:08 a.m. on Friday, August 30th. It was from a residential area in Castaic. He told his mother he was looking at the lake. He was going to get some sleep. He promised to call her in the morning. Karen, exhausted but clinging to that promise, finally tried to get some rest herself. It was the last time she would ever hear her son's voice. The first light of Friday, August 30th, crept over the Sierra Pelona Mountains, painting the sky in shades of pale rose and gray. The air was cool and still. At around 5:30 a.m., the California Highway Patrol received a call. A vehicle had been spotted more than 20 feet down a steep embankment off Lake Hughes Road, a winding, two-lane road that hugs the edge of Castaic Lake. When officers arrived, they found a 2004 Toyota Highlander, beige in color, resting on its side. It had apparently veered off the road at a sharp curve, tumbled down the rocky slope, and come to rest in the dense brush. The officers ran the plates. The vehicle was registered to Michael and Karen Laspisa. It was Bryce's car. The scene was eerily quiet. There was no sign of a driver. The officers carefully made their way down the embankment to the wrecked vehicle. The passenger side window was smashed, and the rear window had been broken out from the inside. They peered into the overturned SUV. Bryce's cell phone was there, his wallet, with his driver's license and credit cards, was on the seat. His laptop bag was in the back. A duffel bag with some of his clothes was also present. Everything he had with him on his journey, it seemed, was still in the car. But of Bryce, there was no trace. On the back seat, investigators noticed a small amount of blood. It wasn't a significant amount, not indicative of a major, life-threatening injury, but it was there. It suggested he had been injured in the crash, perhaps cut by the broken glass. The way the rear window was shattered, with the glass pushed outward, suggested that he had likely broken it himself to climb out of the wrecked vehicle. The scene posed more questions than answers. The crash itself was strange. There were no skid marks on the road above, suggesting he hadn't slammed on the brakes. It was as if he had simply driven straight off the road at a controlled speed. It didn't look like a high-speed accident. Had he fallen asleep at the wheel, or had he deliberately driven off the embankment? And the most pressing question of all, where was he? If he had climbed out of the car, injured but alive, where had he gone? The sun was now fully up, and the remote, rugged landscape around the crash site was illuminated. It was a vast, unforgiving terrain of canyons, hills, and thick chaparral. A search was about to begin, a desperate hunt for a young man who had simply vanished into the morning mist. The call from the California Highway Patrol shattered the fragile hope that Karen and Michael Laspisa had been clinging to. Their son's car had been found, wrecked and empty. They raced from their home in Laguna Niguel to Castaic, a drive filled with a sickening, heart-pounding dread. When they arrived, the scene was already a hub of activity. Search and rescue teams were assembling, their brightly colored uniforms a stark contrast to the muted tones of the landscape. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department had taken over the investigation. The search began immediately, a multi-pronged effort to comb the rugged terrain around the crash site. Teams on foot, equipped with radios and GPS units, fanned out, pushing their way through the dense, thorny brush. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the temperature began to soar, making the search effort even more grueling. The air was filled with the sound of a helicopter's rotors as it circled overhead, its crew scanning the ground for any sign of movement, any splash of color that didn't belong. Bloodhounds were brought in, their powerful noses capable of detecting a scent trail hours old. They were given an item of Bryce's clothing to smell, and they immediately picked up a scent. The dogs led the search teams away from the crash site, not down toward the lake, but back up toward the road. The trail was strong. They followed it along Lake Hughes Road for several hundred yards, their handlers struggling to keep up. The dogs were insistent, pulling hard on their leashes. The scent trail continued, leading them away from the desolate crash site and toward a place of commerce, of transit. The trail ended abruptly at a truck stop, a small oasis of asphalt and diesel fumes on the edge of the wilderness. The dogs sniffed around the parking lot, their excitement turning to confusion. The scent was gone. It was as if Bryce had walked from the crash to the truck stop and then simply evaporated into thin air. Had he gotten into a car? Had someone given him a ride? Or was the trail a dead end, a confusing jumble of smells that ultimately meant nothing? The search of the area around Castaic Lake continued for days, a massive operation involving hundreds of volunteers and law enforcement personnel. They searched the lake itself, with divers exploring the murky depths and sonar boats scanning the bottom. They scoured the canyons, the ravines, the thickets of manzanita and scrub oak. They found nothing. No footprints, no discarded clothing, no further trace of Bryce Laspisa. It was as if the earth had swallowed him whole. In the days and weeks that followed, the investigation into Bryce's disappearance intensified. Detectives from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department began the painstaking process of recreating his last known hours, a timeline that was already maddeningly complex and full of holes. They interviewed his friends at Sierra College, who painted a picture of a young man in the throes of a sudden and severe emotional crisis. They spoke of the heavy drinking, the prescription drug abuse, the uncharacteristic behavior. They interviewed his girlfriend, Kim, who recounted the strange, final phone calls and the abrupt end to their relationship. The theory that Bryce was suffering from some kind of psychotic break, perhaps induced by the combination of sleep deprivation, alcohol, and stimulants, gained traction. It would explain his erratic driving, his paranoia about his parents coming to get him, and his general state of confusion. But it didn't explain where he had gone. Detectives also explored the possibility that he had chosen to disappear? Had the pressure of school, of his parents' expectations, become too much? Was he trying to escape his life and start anew? It was a plausible theory. He was an adult, and he was free to walk away if he wanted to. But it didn't quite fit. Why leave behind his car, his wallet, his phone? These were the essential tools for anyone trying to build a new life. And what about the cryptic statement he had made to his parents, that he had something important to tell them? What was this secret that was so significant he had to deliver it in person, yet so troubling that it seemed to propel him into a state of crisis? The investigation also had to consider the possibility of foul play. The scent trail ending at the truck stop was a particularly ominous piece of the puzzle. Had he walked from the crash, perhaps dazed and injured, and accepted a ride from the wrong person? The area around Castaic Lake, while scenic, is also a transient corridor, a major artery for truck traffic and travelers of all kinds. It was not impossible to think that he had crossed paths with someone who meant him harm. Detectives scoured surveillance footage from the truck stop and other nearby businesses, hoping for a glimpse of Bryce, a clue to who he might have been with. But the cameras yielded nothing. He was a ghost, a phantom who had left behind a wrecked car and 1,000 unanswered questions. As the official search wound down, Karen and Michael Laspisa refused to give up hope. They hired a private investigator, a former FBI agent, to continue the search for their son. They established a command center, plastered flyers with Bryce's smiling face all over Southern California, and created a Find Bryce Laspisa Facebook page that quickly garnered a massive following. The story of the bright, talented young man who had vanished on his way home resonated with people, and tips began to pour in. The family and their investigator followed up on every lead, no matter how tenuous. There were reported sightings in Oregon, in Nevada, in other parts of California. Each one brought a surge of hope, followed by the crushing disappointment of a dead end. Some sightings were cases of mistaken identity. Others were cruel hoaxes. One of the most promising leads came from a woman who claimed to have seen a young man matching Bryce's description at a truck stop near the Oregon border. The man was disheveled, she said, and seemed confused. He was with a group of people who appeared to be transients. The family traveled to the location, searching homeless encampments, showing Bryce's picture to anyone who would look. But the trail went cold. They were chasing a ghost. The years began to pass. Each anniversary of his disappearance was a fresh wave of grief for his family and friends. The Facebook page remained active, a digital vigil kept alive by a community of strangers who had been touched by his story. They shared theories, offered words of support, and kept his memory alive. The case became a fixture in the true crime community, dissected on podcasts and discussed in online forums. Was it a voluntary disappearance, a tragic accident, a mental health crisis that ended in tragedy? Or was there a more sinister explanation? The mystery of Bryce Laspisa was a void, and into that void, people poured their own fears and speculations. But for those who knew and loved him, it was not a mystery to be solved. It was a wound that would not heal, a constant, aching absence, a handsome, smiling face, frozen in time, forever 19, forever lost on a dark road to nowhere. So what really happened to Bryce Laspisa? In the absence of evidence, of answers, all that remains are the theories, each one a different path to an unknown destination. The most widely accepted theory, and the one that seems to align most closely with his behavior in the days leading up to his disappearance, is that he suffered a severe mental health crisis. The combination of heavy alcohol use, prescription stimulant abuse, and a lack of sleep could have easily triggered a state of psychosis. In this state, his perception of reality would have been altered. He may have been experiencing paranoia, delusions, or hallucinations. This would explain the erratic driving, the strange phone calls, the fear of his parents, and the decision to drive his car off the road. Perhaps he believed he was being followed, or that he was in some kind of danger. After the crash, dazed and injured, he might have wandered off into the wilderness, disoriented and unable to find his way back to safety. The vast, rugged terrain around Castaic Lake is unforgiving. In a confused state, without food or water, he could have easily succumbed to the elements, his body hidden in a remote canyon or a dense thicket of brush. never to be found. It's a tragic and plausible scenario, a story of a young mind overwhelmed by a storm it could not control. Another prominent theory is that Bryce chose to disappear. Perhaps the secret he needed to tell his parents was something he felt he could never confess. Maybe he was struggling with a hidden addiction, a gambling debt, or a personal crisis he felt was insurmountable. The pressure to maintain the image of the perfect son, the talented artist, the popular college student, may have become too much to bear. In this scenario, the entire 20-hour drive was a prolonged, agonizing goodbye. The giving away of his possessions, the breakup with his girlfriend, the final, strange journey. It could all be interpreted as the actions of someone preparing to leave their old life behind. The crash could have been a deliberate attempt to stage a disappearance, to make it look like he had perished, allowing him to slip away and start over somewhere else, under a new name, a new identity. The fact that the scent trail ended at a truck stop lends credence to this theory. It's the perfect place to catch a ride, to blend in with the transient population, to become anonymous. It's a romantic, almost cinematic idea. The young man who walks away from it all to reinvent himself. But it's a difficult reality to sustain. How does someone with no money, no ID, and no phone survive in the modern world? While not impossible, it would be an incredibly difficult life. A life on the fringes, a life of constant struggle and fear of being discovered. Is it possible that Bryce Laspisa is out there somewhere, living off the grid, having successfully erased his past? It's a sliver of hope that his family clings to, the idea that he is alive, even if he has chosen a different life. The darkest and most disturbing theory is that Bryce Laspisa was a victim of foul play. This theory hinges on the scent trail ending at the truck stop. If he did walk away from the crash, he would have been vulnerable. He was likely disoriented, possibly injured, and in a state of psychological distress. He was a young, handsome man, alone in the early hours of the morning at a location frequented by strangers. It is entirely possible that he accepted a ride from someone with malicious intent. He could have been robbed, abducted, or worse. The person responsible would have had ample opportunity to dispose of his body in the vast, remote wilderness of Southern California. This theory explains the abrupt end of the scent trail and the complete lack of any further sightings or evidence. It suggests that Bryce's erratic behavior was not the cause of his demise, but rather the thing that put him in the path of a predator. It's a chilling thought that his desperate journey home ended in a chance encounter with violence. For investigators, it's a frustrating scenario. Without a body, without a crime scene, without any witnesses, it is nearly impossible to prove. It remains a shadow in the background of the case, a terrifying possibility that cannot be dismissed. The small amount of blood found in the car, while likely from the crash itself, also leaves open the possibility of an earlier altercation, a struggle that preceded the final, fateful moments on Lake Hughes Road. Years have passed since Bryce Laspisa vanished. The official investigation is cold, filed away in a cabinet with other unsolved cases, a collection of unanswered questions and lingering what-ifs. But for his family, the case is never cold. It is a living, breathing part of their daily existence. His room at their home in Laguna Niguel is untouched, a museum of a life interrupted. His artwork hangs on the walls, a vibrant, tangible reminder of the talent and passion that defined him. His mother, Karen, continues to manage the Facebook page, posting updates, sharing memories, and keeping the flame of hope alive. She responds to messages from strangers, people from all over the world who have been captivated by her son's story. In a way, she has become the caretaker of his memory, a fierce and dedicated advocate for a son she cannot see, but refuses to forget. The community that has formed around the search for Bryce is a testament to the enduring power of his story. It's a story about the fragility of the human mind, about the secrets we keep, and about the terrifying speed at which a life can unravel. It's a story about a parent's worst nightmare, the phone call in the middle of the night, the empty car on the side of the road. It reminds us that sometimes the people who seem to have it all are the ones who are struggling the most, fighting silent battles that no one else can see. The search for answers continues, a quest for a single piece of evidence, a single witness, a single clue that can illuminate the darkness and bring peace to a family that has waited for far too long. Where do you look for someone who has vanished from the face of the earth? You look in the faces of strangers in a crowded street. You look in the vast, empty deserts and the dense, silent forests. You look in the digital ether of the internet, scrolling through cold cases and unidentified remains. You look in your own heart, in the memories and the moments that defined a life. For the family of Bryce Laspisa, the search is everywhere. The landscape of Castaic Lake has changed little since that August morning in 2013. The sun still beats down on the golden hills. The water is still and deep, and the winding roads still carry travelers on their journeys. But for those who know the story, the area is haunted. It is haunted by the image of an overturned SUV, by the ghost of a scent trail that leads to nowhere, and by the lingering presence of a young man who drove into the heart of a mystery and was never seen again. The questions remain, hanging in the warm California air. What was the secret Bryce was so desperate to tell his parents? Did he find the peace that so clearly eluded him in his final hours? Or did he meet with a terrible fate on a lonely road? We may never know the answers. All we can do is tell his story, say his name, and remember the bright, talented young man who was so much more than just his disappearance. His name is Bryce Laspisa, and he is still missing.